In the past few decades, the world has gotten significantly smaller. This is due in part by technological and social developments such as new global relations, exports, immigration, and, of course, the internet. The term globalization is often used to refer to this idea in discussions about the state of the world, but it can be applied here in discussions about music in the context of being a sort of byproduct of cultural change. All of these factors help to bring different ideas and walks of life closer together, thus leading to new multicultural movements composed of some rather unlikely combinations. We see this phenomenon in pop culture constantly. One of the more intriguing music-based subcultures to come out of this is the unique Eurodance and J-pop marriage that started in the European club scene and made its way across Japanese pop culture and eventually evolved into a highly aestheticized and, dare I say, artistic movement that continues to prevail in current popular music and internet culture. If you don't know what I'm referring to, take Aqua's Barbie Girl as an example. This is a song about an American product, sung in English, by a Danish music group that features Japanese branding in their music video. Or Caramel Dancin', a worldwide internet meme song from a fictionalized anime trio, sung in Swedish. Or how about those lazy, sped-up pop remixes that always have cute anime boys in their YouTube thumbnails from 2007, despite rarely ever being in Japanese and having seemingly no clear connection to anime at all. Kind of a weird coincidence that these two innocuous but seemingly very separate music cultures keep cropping up together. While often used as a point of mockery today, the connection to cultural change and significance here goes deeper than you may initially think. Let's start in the mid-80s in Central Europe. Italy and Germany became powerhouses for electronic music. Eurodance became a huge part of European clubs and nightlife because it was a music genre specifically engineered to be fast, catchy, simple, and most importantly, danceable. The lyrics are often described as lackluster, but the powerful, soaring female vocals became an integral part of the sound, and shouldn't be understated. This kind of music quickly spread to the UK and found immense success there as well. The reason these tunes are predominantly sung in English, despite originating in non-English speaking countries, is because America was seen as the primary market for musicians in order to find success. And of course, because of all the efforts to Americanize the youth across other parts of the world in the 60s and 70s, it became the standard for marketability, especially in entertainment. This is ironic, considering the style of music was little more than a brief trend to Americans in a bygone era. While artists like Dead or Alive and later on Hathaway helped to introduce Eurodance to the US and found moderate success in the 80s and 90s, it was incomparable to the contagion the genre was met with overseas. Because music genres and labels can quickly become highly nuanced and specific, I will be using the term Eurobeat from here on out to describe music that features intense, pulsating beats, driving synth arpeggios, and usually features a lead female vocalist and a rap verse or two, usually by a male vocalist in questionable English. Despite the many terms this style of music could fall under, I can almost guarantee you already have a broad idea of the kind of music I am talking about here, and we'll be sticking with this as an umbrella term in order to encompass the whole scope of the genre, as it was used in Japan to refer to any European music export. Around the same time, a style of dance known in Japan as para became practically synonymous with Eurobeat after compilation albums were released in Japan and became the primary form that consumers would interact with. Para is a style of dance that is meant to be performed by large groups in unison, typically in a club setting. It is characterized by its elaborate arm movements and simple two-step in accompaniment. Nowadays, para is more or less seen as a product of its time, but a staple of Japanese nightlife culture nonetheless, not unlike how disco is typically viewed in the Western world. So what was the deal with these compilation albums? These are less common in the West, usually taking the form of best-of compilations, commonly for one particular artist. In Japan, though, they're a bit different. These compilation albums were another key factor in the rise and retention of Eurobeat in Japan. They're composed of the different variations of this type of music, and became somewhat of a backbone for the popularity of the genre, and helped to keep its presence going long after it began to die out in Western and Central Europe. The most popular series started in 1991, titled Super Eurobeat by label Avex, and is actually still going. They're up to volume number 255 as of November 2nd. Of course, all of these songs included were produced in Italy, but were released in Japan due to licensing and copyright issues, at least in the early days of the series. Eurobeat tracks also found their way into other forms of Japanese pop culture. That's right, I'm talking about anime series began utilizing Eurobeat for opening themes and soundtracks. Perhaps the most famous example of this is Initial D's soundtrack, which used tracks like Running in the 90s, Gas Gas Gas, and Euro Hero for its opening themes and score, and has turned into somewhat of a meme in more recent years. You'll find that this becomes somewhat of a trend. This is perhaps what started the strong relationship between Japanese animation aesthetics, like futuristic neon cities, ideas of consumerism in relation to Japanese branding, and synth-heavy pop music that we often seen working in tandem today in everything from vaporwave to trance and techno to synth pop. It seems there's just something about the association between the rapid progression of technology in a highly metropolized area and the infectious beat of a synthesizer that just clicks in place for us and becomes this recognizable manifestation of futurism. And the very fact that all of this was taking place right at the start of the new millennium, where there was constant talk of impending cyber destruction, I bet had everything to do with the optimistic space-age themes that coincided with Eurobeat. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. After Japan adopted the spirit of Eurobeat and everything it had to offer, the music began to cement itself further into the public consciousness with the introduction of Dance Dance Revolution! Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR as it is referred to by connoisseurs, is Konami's dance-based arcade cabinet that was produced in Japan in 1998. Just 1 year later, it became an international hit, with its release in Europe and North America. The game challenges the player to match steps that are mapped out in time to popular Eurobeat and Eurobeat-inspired tracks. More on this later. An interesting thing to note here is the shift that DDR caused in the understanding of the subculture. The game takes clear inspiration from the para-para style of dance and overarching elements of the popular trend, but focuses on steps in order to play the game, rather than emphasizing the complex arm movements that para-para is known for. This is likely just meant to be an adaptation to the technological limitations of the time, but this deviation only added to the wider understanding of the constantly evolving subculture. The game even went on to form its own legacy, and one could argue that it spawned a subculture of its own, with serious competitions popping up everywhere for only the most skilled rhythm game enjoyers. A game more akin to the original style of para-para did actually pop up in arcades just 2 years later. Para-para Paradise, also built by Konami, used infrared sensors to track the player's arms and was a more direct product of the Eurobeat era, exclusively using tracks from Avex. It was only released in Japan and Korea, but the Korean version was changed to include more Korean music, perhaps showing how specific the Eurobeat subculture was to Japan at this point. It even saw a PlayStation 2 release, but the title saw much less success than its predecessor. It wasn't long before Japan began contributing its own spin on the once Eurocentric music genre. While the late 90s saw a steep decline in Eurobeat within its countries of origin, a third wave of the genre was evolving in Japan. As popularity decreased, Italian producers recognized the direction the synthesized beat market was taking overseas and began working with Japanese artists, and thus J-Euro was born. Generally speaking, J-Euro takes 3 different forms. The first to come about were localized covers of the popular Eurobeat songs of the last decade by Japanese artists, but still produced by the Italians. Then came original Japanese songs that were then remixed in the Eurobeat style by Italian producers. Then finally, Japan began producing its own Eurobeat music by Japanese artists and producers. Another way in which Japan seemed to take this idea and run was with the development of the vocal synthesis software that took the once separate worlds of music and anime by storm. Hatsune Miku is the first and most recognizable example of a Vocaloid, a vocal synthesis software and voice bank used for music composition, released in 2004. Because there was a name and cutely designed character attached to the program for marketing purposes, it took off in popularity almost instantly, and she too became an entity all on her own, despite all of her music coming from different musicians, as the software essentially just provided the sound. This is a fascinating rabbit hole to go down, as there is so much more that could be said about this phenomenon of fictional artists, and the nature of the software itself. If you're interested, I recommend this video about the original intention of the software and the community that grew out of it. It's a really fascinating watch. Anyway, this was big for independent electronic music. The faux chipperness and robotic quality of the vocals worked perfectly with the already established formula that Eurobeat and JEuro had mastered. Because the majority of music that was being made with the Vocaloid software was heavily based on the conventions of Eurobeat, it even further meshed the ideas of futuristic technology and music together, and now it had an anime poster girl to go along with it. In fact, her name, Hatsune Miku, literally translates to the sound of the future. Around this time, yet another version of Eurobeat was taking form. Nightcore is a term used to describe a method of mixing that primarily relies on speeding up and increasing the pitch of pre-existing pop songs. The term is actually derived from a Norwegian duo made up of DJ TNT and DJ SOS, who are considered to be the first to use this method for Eurodance and trance in club settings. I was personally shocked to learn that Nightcore didn't originate in Japan because it is so heavily associated with otaku and internet culture, and it's not hard to see why. The high-pitched vocal effect you get from increasing the tempo is reminiscent of the Vocaloid music and was originally used on the popular club music we've become so familiar with here. Nightcore mixes are everywhere, and like the YouTube hits that utilized Vocaloid software, became somewhat controversial because of the fact that it strips the original musician of the deserved credit, since little is actually being changed from the original song. In the few research articles I was able to find about this topic, this idea kept popping up about how it's curious that Europe had this much of an influence on Japanese pop culture, but not much in the way of Japan's influence creeping into European pop culture. This is to say, there wasn't as much of a cultural exchange going on that would normally be observed in other cases like this. This is more akin to cultural assimilation, or even a form of westernization, at least according to some. However, I have to disagree with this assessment. If we are limited to talking just about the music, I could see how someone would come to this conclusion. But I would argue that Japan added and iterated to the subculture that came along with and grew out of the music. The dances and games and aesthetics that are so heavily associated with Eurobeat now mostly came from Japan, while Europe merely provided the soundtrack. Eurobeat is rarely taken very seriously. I personally never saw it as anything noteworthy besides being a factory for earworms and being nothing more than fun party music. But after taking a look into its complex and fascinating history, I see it as a unique case of cultural hybridization that wasn't afraid to continue growing, reiterating, and changing. As corny as it sounds, the genre really has always been about bringing people together, with its many worldly influences, emphasis on nightlife and social dancing, and high-spirited, easily consumable beats that encourage you to participate in choreographed dance in the club or competitive dance in the arcade. Hatsune Miku encourages you to create your own musical contributions, while Nightcore serves as an easy introduction to the world of mixing for those who may just be beginning. Eurobeat is not an exclusive genre. It's made for all walks of life, nationalities, communities, and subcultures, and despite it largely being treated like a frivolous and insubstantial fad, continues to persist in our increasingly complex and serious world. My name is Circucision. Thank you so much for joining me today.